Every week we are assigned a section of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, to read in synagogue, so that in the course of a year we read the entire corpus of the book, roll it back to the beginning, and start again. So after some time you begin to expect, week to week, what you're going to see. And then sometimes you're surprised. Sometimes you turn the page to that week's reading and something stares at you and you say, no wait, what's that again? And that's this week's Torah portion. We're going to read a story that shouldn't be here. A story that shouldn't have been included. A story that somehow slipped through. Why did this story slip through? I couldn't tell you exactly. The question is, what is it here to teach? Because it's not a pleasant story. It's not a positive story. It's a painful story to read. And it somehow got into the corpus of the scripture. You see, you take a vacation with your kids. We do this, a family vacation. You take a lot of pictures. And then sometime after the vacation, when you finally get home, you go through the pictures and you toss out the ones where the kids are cross-eyed or sticking their tongues out or making rabbit ears over each other. So what's left is a picture of a happy, sweet family vacation. And you forget all the other stuff that went on. It's one of the fun things about reading high school yearbooks. Makes high school look so idyllic and so beautiful. And you forget about the struggle of adolescence. And you imagine that religion does the same thing when it tells the stories, particularly the stories of its founders. It tells idyllic stories of wisdom and giving and generosity and kindness and giving. And you wouldn't expect a story of betrayal, of disloyalty. You wouldn't expect a story of transgression, of brokenness. And that's the story that comes here. And the question is, why is it in this part of the Torah? Why is it in the Torah altogether? Why is it that we read it, and what does it come to teach? We were slaves in the land of Egypt. We were slaves, our parents, our grandparents were slaves. We had no hope except to go on being slaves, and our kids maybe would have it a little easier than we did. And then one day this fellow Moses shows up and says, pack your things, we're leaving. And very few of us believed him, but a few of us did, and we followed him out into the desert, 3 days. And for a moment took a breath and imagined maybe it's true, maybe we could be free. And then Pharaoh came screaming down the hillside in his chariots, and we looked to Moses and said, do something. And Moses held his arm across the sea, and the sea split, and we crossed. And on the other side, we sang a song of freedom. Because suddenly we had this vision that there's a God who cares for us, a God with purposes in our history, a God who uses us as a vessel of bringing something righteous to the world, something compassionate and powerful to the world. And we proceeded from there to Mount Sinai, where we stood in an intimate relationship with that God. And that God said, I want to lift you up to become a holy people. And you will build a just society, and you will live as a sacred community, and you will bring justice and goodness to the world. And we said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do this. And there was this moment of profound intimacy between this people and its God, and faith and solidarity and wholeness and purpose and direction. And God said, send me Moses. Bring Moses up to the top of the mountain for 40 days so that he might receive my law. So Moses, he climbs the mountain for 40 days. And that's where the problem begins. Because 40 days go by and Moses isn't heard from. Moses isn't coming down, and after all, he's an 80-year-old man, and this is a quaking, shivering mountain. And what happened to him? And this was a people that had been raised in the culture of Egypt, and Egypt was a visual culture. You build monuments to show your gods. You build hieroglyphics to tell the stories. You costume your leaders in elaborate costumes. It's all visual religion, and with no Moses in front of us, no visual representation of leadership, nothing to look to, we began to quake in fear. What are we doing here? Are we to die in this wilderness? Who will lead us? Where will we go? And we became so gripped by that fear, we turned on his brother Aaron and said, "Make us a God who will lead us." And Aaron said, "Take the gold from your ears and bring them to me." And he took that gold and he built a golden calf. And we looked at that golden calf and said, "This is the God who released you from Egypt." And that intimacy gave way to betrayal. And that closeness and common purpose and solidarity gave way to disloyalty. And a principle of conscience that had once been agreed upon, consensus, that had once been celebrated, melted away into a moment of fearful intransigence, transgression. And we danced in front of that calf. This is the God who will lead us. Now, Moses comes down the mountain. And the emotional swings of this story are so remarkable. So Moses is coming down filled with the light of having spent 40 days with God, carrying these stone tablets that are signed by God. He comes down and he sees this in the camp. And he's just gripped with such a sense of brokenness that the brokenness carries all the way through, and he smashes the tablets and asks this people, "What have you become?" Why is this story here? How can this story possibly be here? Why would you tell such a story about your ancestors? First of all, why is it here in the Torah? Because by rights, by chronology of the story, it should have happened about 7-8 chapters earlier. It should have happened in the story when Moses goes up to Mount Sinai. But what's happened in the context here is that for the last 2 weeks we've been reading the story of building the Mishkan. God told us to build a shrine that we would carry with us so that God could dwell among us. So why is the story of the golden calf placed in the middle of that story? That's the first question. And I think the answer has to do with the motivations between them. The Mishkan, this Ark of the Covenant. Yes, same one Harrison Ford found in a movie. The Ark of the Covenant was built as an expression of our aspiration to become a holy people. And a religion that forces you to look up and imagine what we can be as a people. To look up and gain a vision of what we can be collectively in the world we can create for our children. To look up and imagine who we could be as people, as individuals. The kinds of lives, the values we can embrace. The generosity of spirit and goodness. A religion that forces you to do that is a very different religion than a religion which is a projection of fear. Because when you add fear to the mix, when religion becomes an expression of fear, when politics become an expression of fear, when culture becomes an expression of fear, it makes us look down, not up. It makes us hold tight instead of opening our hearts and opening our hands. It makes us build walls with locked gates instead of opening doors that say welcome. It closes windows. It closes minds. When fear becomes the story of a culture, that culture shrinks in its vision, its aspiration, and its holiness evaporates. And so the story is here as a warning. Don't let fear come to infect you. Because when a people decides to worship a God that is a God of fear, The only direction they will go is back to Egypt and submit themselves to a Pharaoh and give themselves back to slavery. But if a religion opens itself to a vision of a holy people, a sacred community, a just society, to an aspiration, that community moves toward a promised land and a better place. That's the first reason. That's why it's in this section of the Torah. But then why isn't it in the Torah altogether? Well, there's an interesting midrash that I'll share with you as we conclude. So Moses sees this calf and he gets so angry at this people that he smashes the tablets. Then he punishes the people. And one of the questions is, as the story resolves, God will tell him, come back to the top of the mountain, we'll make new tablets. And it was those new tablets, the second set of tablets, that were kept in the Holy Ark of the Covenant. But the Midrash, the tradition, asked a really silly question. So what happened to the broken pieces of the first tablets? The ones that God made? What did Moses do with them? You don't simply toss those things out. They don't get stuck in a garage somewhere. And the answer was beautifully given in the Midrash by the rabbis, that Moses gathered the broken fragments of that first set of tablets, and they too were kept in the Holy Ark, beside the whole ones. Because you must understand that wherever you go in life, you must carry your shadow with you. We must carry the memory of our brokenness, the awareness, the consciousness of the latent brokenness in us, if we intend to find wholeness in the days ahead. It's one of the reasons why a couple breaks a glass at the end of a wedding. You need to know that love is easy and beautiful and spontaneous, but marriage is work, because it involves confronting your own brokenness, your impatience, confronting your prejudices, confronting your ways of doing things, your stubbornness. Just ask my wife. You have to you learn in marriage to confront all the brokenness in your soul. And if a marriage is to work, you learn how to slowly put those pieces together into something that is beautiful and something that is whole. And in the same way, in faith, we carry our brokenness with us, because that now becomes the abiding theme of our faith. It's not going to be easy. Yes, we can be a holy people and create a just society. Yes, we can create a holy people. We can become sacred community, but it's going to mean fixing the brokenness within. And as we do that, we turn outward and fix the brokenness outside. And the project of tikkun, which means fixing, repairing, making whole, resolving the brokenness, fitting the pieces back together, that becomes the holy task of this people. Oh, and by the way, about 3-4 years ago, when the community decided to remodel this beautiful room, didn't always look like this. Used to be purple. Blue. So they remodeled the room, and I was on vacation. I was in Israel over the summer, and I came back, and they had fixed some of the room. They didn't put the seats in yet, but they'd fixed the bima. And I walked into the room, and I saw that, the Ner Tamid. And my very first thought was, oh my God, the architect knows the Midrash. Because what a beautiful symbol to put over the Ark of the Covenant. The broken tablets of the broken pieces of the first tablets. And I said, that's magnificent. The broken pieces of the first tablets, so that we are reminded every time we take a child to this Torah that her job in life is to put those pieces back together and make the world whole, Mila. That's what you got to do. And the light from those broken pieces shines upon you. And then I asked Matt Weintraub, who was our executive director, who was working with the architect, I said, how did you get an architect who reads Midrash? And he said, no, there was a sale at a store in West LA on chandeliers. And that one was on sale. We got a great deal on it. And I said, shh, don't tell anyone. It's such a beautiful symbol. It's such a beautiful symbol. Don't tell anyone. One more short story about this Parsha. My dear friend Ronnie Wolfson, who today with Susie is struggling for health. My dear friend Ronnie Wolfson was in San Francisco visiting Chinatown, and they went into one of those art stores in Chinatown, and he saw the most beautiful ceramic box. It was a ceramic box made up of little fragments of china, of different kinds of colors and shapes and designs of china. And he asked the shopkeeper, and it's held together with this beautiful golden thread. There's a name for this in Japanese, and I forgot what it is. But it's very valuable. And he asked the guy, what's the story? And the shopkeeper said, you know, in China we get a lot of earthquakes, and you end up breaking a lot of your dishes. So the custom in China is to take the pieces of your broken dishes to an artisan, and the artisan puts them together with golden thread and creates a memento of all the days you've lived in the world and a new wholeness out of all the broken pieces. And that's a beautiful metaphor for what Torah is. The story is here to remind us that we are to take the broken pieces and put them together. For if we put them together, we create something from which light shines, something more beautiful than it was before. And so in the midst of this story of faith and solidarity and unity and fidelity, we have a painful, painful story of disloyalty to remind us of our deepest tasks in life.